Daniel Wahlen, who's the Director, Global Enterprise Marketing and Client Engagement at Indeed. And he is working for Indeed now for quite a while. And before that, he worked at Google in Europe and in the US. He's going to give a talk, a really relevant talk called The Future of Candidate Experience and How to Better Connect with Candidates in an Increasingly Virtual World. So super interesting. I'm really looking forward, and I'm really grateful that to have you here, Daniel. So now over to you. Stage is yours.
I'm also very excited, and I certainly hope that today is going to be super interesting, just like you announced. I'm specifically excited because number one, this topic is very close to my heart. Personally, I live in Germany, not in cool Berlin, but in uncool Düsseldorf. And, you know, in working at Indeed, which is the #1 job site in the world with a huge presence in India as well, we are firmly believers in equalizing opportunities, a global workforce, and that, you know, companies like India and the skilled labor can pose a massive opportunity for companies in Germany. So going to dive into how can we recruit people in a virtual world within Germany, from outside of Germany, and specifically going to touch upon the Indian market just for a brief second, because I did look at our data, which is an advantage if, you know, if you're a global platform, then you can kind of understand how is the labor force behaving and where are people looking for jobs. And so Germany overall, when you compare it to the world, typically is on 4th or 5th place when it comes to attractivity to job seekers. So #1 is US, then you have Canada and UK, which are all English-speaking countries. And then you have Germany and Switzerland always battling for the 5th and 4th place in this ranking. So alone in August alone in the last month, clicks in Germany got 36,000 clicks from job seekers in India. And that is a large amount, but it becomes even more interesting when you look at what are the top terms that Indian job seekers have typed into Indeed before they clicked onto jobs on Indeed. And you can see it's basically exactly the kind of employees, the kind of target group that German startups, German companies have, which is from the fields of IT, project management, marketing. So there honestly is an amazing opportunity there. And so today, let's dive into, you know, how can we leverage that potential in a good and meaningful way with our candidates. So going back, the topic indeed is the future of candidate experience. And I need to give a little heads up right away. I'm expecting a delivery today, and it's been scheduled from 8 till 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So there is a slight chance that, you know, it happens exactly while I'm doing this talk. And then what I need to go do is I need to run to the door and tell them to just leave it down in the hallway. So it'll take like 30 seconds and I'll be back in no time. But it's also, you know, it's something that working in remote, you know, in remote settings, working from home, that is something that can happen. And I think we've seen funny things happen. If you remember the CNN correspondent who got a surprise visit from his kids during a live interview, or maybe you remember the lawyer who swears he's not a cat. And a lot of that, you know, we laughed about it, we found it lovely. But a fair question we need to ask ourselves is, do we always extend the same kind of courtesy, the same kind of empathy to our candidates that we interview in a virtual world? So today is going to be a lot about that. It's going to be about how can we be more human and more connected in a world that is more disconnected than ever, more distant, more remote, more virtual. And we'll talk about candidate experience and what do candidates need from us to be able to put their best foot forward in the process, and what do we need to assess candidates fairly, even if we don't fully understand their background, the universities they're coming from, the study programs they've done, and how can we present our company in the best light possible. And I can't be in Berlin today, so I'm doing this virtually. We have a policy at the moment that we're not joining events. I hope that is going to change very soon. But so has been hiring. It's been mostly virtual. And many employers have found new ways during the pandemic to hire talent, such as virtual hiring events. And we've also seen something interesting, which is an accelerated adoption of automation technology, starting from sourcing to screening up to scheduling interviews. But I think one fair question is, what does all this mean for candidate experience? Because when you think about it, job search itself is emotional. You're making yourself, you're opening up yourself, you're indicating your interest. So it's emotional, it's stressful, and that's true at the best of times. But when we think back in the last 18 months, it's been really particularly hard on job seekers because layoffs, lockdowns, record unemployment rates created a whole new environment for us. And on top, a lot of job seekers had to learn new processes. So positive candidate experience can help ease some of this stress, and it can help candidates put their best foot forward in the process. But on the flip side, a poor candidate experience can seriously damage your employer brand. So 72% of people say that their perception of a company changes slightly or significantly to the negative if they never hear back from a company after applying. 50% say that they will share this experience with their in-person and online networks. And then 1 in 5 will also go and leave a negative review on a job site, such as Indeed, or maybe you're aware of Glassdoor. Indeed and Glassdoor belong to the same mother company and we're very strong partners. And that's a very interesting and important aspect, because when you think about it, reviews is where most job seekers go before they decide whether they apply to a company or not. And so when you have one candidate with a negative experience and they leave a negative review, you haven't just lost that one candidate, but you're actually at risk at losing a whole lot of potential future candidates. So we got to get this right. We got to build great relationships. And I think, as probably any relationship, they should be based on 3 basic principles: communication, transparency, and trust. And now when we think back to the environment we're in today, the virtual, distant environment, you may wonder, wouldn't, trends like automation and virtual interviews, wouldn't that actually limit our ability to connect with candidates? Wouldn't that worsen candidate experience? And I firmly believe that the answer is not necessary, because with change always comes opportunity. And it's really kind of right in front of us. It's the opportunity to reimagine recruiting, rethink the way we're hiring, and make our processes even better. And for me, the good news is we're all just getting started with it, right? So it's not that the larger, older companies have a huge advantage over us. So we can get this right. It's a level playing field at the moment. So then let's discuss today the job seeker journey along these 3 stages: apply, interview, and onboard, and uncover ways to make it a positive experience both for the job seekers and for us. And so it starts with the apply phase. It's the moment when somebody considers your company. And of course, there's many things that matter today just as much as they mattered 2 years ago, like providing job seekers with the right information through concise, clear job descriptions, like fast, responsive application processes. But there's 2 things that have changed today. One is the type of information that job seekers need, the questions that they have, and lastly, the opportunities for you to make the process faster and fairer for everyone that's involved. So why not start by making a good first impression through telling really relevant information? At these days, safety protocols in the process of applying at you and at work is something that concerns a lot of job seekers, because they will want to know, are you still hiring? Are you still growing? How has the pandemic affected you? Is the role I'm applying to still going to be there when I intend to start it? How did your policies, how did your benefits evolve in the past 18 months? And which ones are permanent? Which ones are meant to go away when things go back to fully being normal? And I like one specific approach here, which is the mantra of don't leave it up to the candidates to ask the right questions. Because if you are getting asked a lot of good questions? The answer is that the candidates weren't able to find the information on your job profiles, on your company pages, on your social media. And so while you may have luck that those few people have asked you those questions, there's probably a whole lot of candidates who simply moved on from this job to another one that was giving them the specific information they were looking for. And so timely, meaningful communication, that's another aspect that is always important during this process. And many companies already use automation here, sending out, thank you for your application, we received it, we'll review it. But why just confirm the receipt of the application when you can also give them tips on, so what should I do in the meantime? How long am I expected to be waiting for an answer? How can I learn more about the company and prepare for a potential interview? I always love that. I think booking.com has these subway maps that look at, this is when you apply, and there's a subway map that shows you the various stages of the process, and at the end it'll tells you, how long it'll take you approximately to get to your final destination, which is of course the offer. Overall, employers predict that trend towards automation will continue along many tasks. So there's job advertising and posting, scheduling interviews. So I need to click down the software update here, screening candidates. Do you see what I see? Okay, there we go. See, these are the things that happen. Let me go back to the next slide. So interviewing, evaluating candidates after an interview, all of that employers predict will become more automated in the future. So I want to look with you at two examples of companies who I think have done a great job at creating a fantastic candidate experience, both for the candidates and for themselves. The first one is Red Bull's Wing Finder, and the name itself is already fantastic. But what it is, it's a skill assessment. They have a skill and personality assessment. They've developed it together with professors from the University College of London and the Columbia University, and they share it with applicants early in the process. They use the results to provide feedback to candidates, but they also use it afterwards to tailor their onboarding plans for that specific candidate. And since then, they have made it public to everyone. So if you're interested in finding out more about your personality and your skills, you can check out Red Bull's Wing Finder. Another example I like is Unilever. They are using gamification to make it even more engaging to interact with candidates. So they ask candidates to play a set of 12 mini games. It takes about 20 minutes to complete. And not only is it more engaging, more entertaining for candidates to do these games, but according to Unilever, it almost creates an almost anonymous game play that it helps to level the playing field and the potential for unconscious bias between candidates, because it's not somebody screening a resume, trying to understand what has the person done, what universities were they at. So it's a fair opportunity. It's a way to assess candidates in a more fair way and to be more objective about. So really, there's two themes here for me, which is automation can be a way to make your processes fairer, reduce unconscious bias potential, but also more entertaining and more faster for companies. So we have seen some companies rethinking hiring altogether, skipping the manual review process, using automation, using assessments to screen candidates who can then go straight to an interview. And that's an amazing experience for a job seeker when they click on a job and we don't tell them click here to apply, but we tell them click here to schedule your interview. And this black hole problem, which is job seekers never hearing back, significantly gets reduced for those job seekers. And at the same time, it helps recruiters to invest more time in connecting with candidates instead of screening resumes, scheduling interviews, and doing the whole communication with candidates. So after the initial phase comes the interview phase. So what the interview phase is really our first opportunity to connect with the candidate. And I think in the past, we were easier able to get a good impression of our candidates when they showed up in our offices, but they were also able to get a better impression of us. You know, we could entice them to a free lunch, we could show them our great offices and our, football tables. And all of this today is reduced to the size of a screen. During the pandemic, full-time, and moving forward into a hybrid world, it will still be a big part of everyday's job life. And that brings along many challenges, and it requires us to be more considerate, more empathetic than ever. Because essentially, virtual interviews are here to stay. During the pandemic, we have seen a rise of 1,600% in jobs that offered virtual interviews. And while as things returned slightly to normal, it dropped a bit, certainly didn't drop by that amount. And we still have a very high level of this. And there's industries that are still hiring in person, like retail, warehousing, healthcare, that continue to leverage these virtual interview techniques, especially when they need to hire at scale or when they need to hire from abroad. And that's not just because it's convenient to the companies, also candidates see the benefits in virtual interviews. So half of the time, half say that these interviews are saving them time and they're more convenient for them. A third say that it feels less formal, less intimidating. And they also report about less anxiety, about arriving late, finding parking, getting there on time. At the same time, employers now have to learn how to build rapport with candidates, how to capture company culture just to the size of a screen. A third of job seekers say it is challenging to be able to assess company culture without being there in person. And they also feel that they cannot get their personality across to an employer as well over video as they could in person. Many are unfamiliar with the norms, with the etiquette, with the expectations of virtual interviews, and simply don't know how to prepare for one. So how can we make the virtual interview experience better? And right up front, I want to say there's plenty of ways, tools, there's innovation to make this better. But, and Julian has announced this today as a keynote, and I'm not sure if you're aware of the term keynote and where it's coming from. It's actually coming from a cappella groups. So it's a choir of people singing, and there's one person in the beginning that will hum a note. This is the keynote, and the rest of the choir will kind of adjust to that basic first note. And so since I'm asked to give the keynote today, I think my tone for you that I would like for all of us to consider throughout this day on both sides, candidate side and job seeker side, is the greatest tool we can give people is just a bit of grace, a bit of empathy, a bit of consideration in this process, acknowledging the situation they are in and vice versa. And here's how we can do that. Well, first by empowering them. And empowering means setting them up for success. We can provide them FAQs about the company, the interview process. We can give them sample questions, simply help them to prepare. We can let them know who they will be meeting and for how long. We can give them detailed information around what tools to use, and we can maybe offer them a test a day before the interview. Why? And well, simply because 1 in 5 job seekers said that they had difficulties from a technical perspective in their virtual interview, and it significantly added to their stress. So take that away from them by offering them reassurance, it will work for me. It works on both ends. Why? Because you essentially help them to reduce stress, help them to put their best foot forward, you empower them. And provide them with maybe a helpline, a phone number, a chat line that they can tend to if there's any technical difficulties. And like I said, practice empathy, be flexible, be empathetic with people. Did you, for instance, know that 20% of job seekers who participated in virtual interviews said that they felt they were being judged based on what people were able to see in their backgrounds, based on their internet connection or their comfort with the technology. So ask people, do you have a stable internet connection? Ask them to move to phone if they indicate they may not have that. And some companies, which I love, provide virtual Zoom, Skype, or Microsoft Teams backgrounds to people that they can use. So it's more of a level playing field, again, reducing a potential for unconscious bias on our end and reducing stress on the candidate's end. And if difficulties arise, be patient, be understanding. Think about, depending on the situation they are living in, it may be difficult to find a quiet space. They may have connectivity issues. There may be kids or dogs coming in. Just like today, I may need to run to get my delivery. And when it comes to the interview itself, I don't know when is the last time you shook somebody's hand. I certainly want to say I have a fully vaccinated status since I think 2.5 weeks now, and handshakes have become a bit more frequent since then. But there haven't been a lot of handshakes in the past 1.5 years. And a lot of the components of in-person interviews are missing today. So what would we typically do? We would walk a candidate to our room. We would do some small talk on the way. We would get them a glass of water. Essentially, we would help them to get their pulse down, help them to be, set up better for success. So this all is gone now. So if you want to give them a fair chance, do make small talk with them at the beginning of the interview. Ask them if they have a glass of water, something to write in front of them. And if they don't, well then, advise them to go get it. And there's 3 more things which are important to me. The number one is the eye contact piece. So we have been taught, in a conversation, it's important that people look you in the eye. Now, in a virtual interview, that is, impossible. I'm a trained presenter, so apart from when I'm looking at the slides or my notes, I know I need to look in the camera, so you have the impression that I'm looking you in the eye. Now, if you look me in the eye on the screen, I have the impression you're looking away from me. So be aware that this should not distract you from assessing the candidate. Also think about interruptions. All these non-verbal cues in an interview, they're missing. So it's much more likely that somebody interrupts you. There may be delays in the communication. And it's also difficult if you interview with 2 people, because you don't have those cues around like, hey, I want to speak now. So maybe set up a chat on the side on your cell phones or so you can align on who's going to speak next and how long are we going to speak. And by the way, one aspect that candidates tell us that constantly comes up in what made you lose trust in that company or dislike the interview was there wasn't enough time for my questions in the interview. So I always recommend take 2/3 of the time. So if it's a 45-minute interview, to assess the candidate and leave 15 minutes at the end to allow questions to the candidates. And lastly, do not forget yourself in the process, right? So it is difficult to convey company culture through a screen, but we need to succeed at it, especially if we are in a startup environment where we maybe don't have those big brands that tend to, create a lot of organic brand traffic. I mean, you can't imagine how many times somebody comes on Indeed in Germany and searches for Mercedes, Bosch, BMW, Aldi, Deutsche Post. It's a lot of traffic these companies are getting just because the consumer brand is very strong. So how can we do this? How can we paint an authentic picture of what it's like to work for us? One opportunity is to follow up with employer brand materials, virtual tours through your office, employee testimonials. What I love is that in some interviews, especially when it's the last round, in the last 5 minutes, a few colleagues zoom in just to say hello and present the kind of team atmosphere that you have. Vodafone does a good job. They offer extensive company materials. They help candidates to prepare for their interviews, for the virtual interviews. They help them to get to know the company, and they include diaries of other virtual recruits who may have been recruited from around the world. And that brings us to, let me check the time real quick. Wonderful. The last phase, Julian, don't get nervous. The last phase, which is the onboarding phase. And when we think about the interview phase being kind of the first impression of us, of a candidate, this is the first impression of you as an employer. And This is not of somebody that's applying for you. This is the first impression of somebody that you want. So it's a crucial part, because not only does it determine productivity and retention, but it's also that feeling of buyer's remorse. Was it a good decision to go work there? Do I feel welcomed? And what will I tell my friends when they ask me tomorrow or in a week, well, how was your first day? How was your first week? It's almost that kind of magical intersection where promise and imagination meets reality. So we got to get this one right as well, especially when it happens virtually. And it will probably stay at least partially virtual, even when things reopen fully. A lot of companies plan to be remote first or hybrid organizations. I myself have now moved to 100% work from home scheme with an option to go into the Indeed Düsseldorf office, basically when I feel like this. So many workers, as you see, 72% prefer such hybrid models, and it's going to be a differentiating factor in the future. Many companies have already adopted these kind of virtual onboarding approaches. Even before Corona, IBM has a Succeeding at IBM program, and that great success with it, 80% is the likeliness, let me rephrase this. They said that their employees who participate in this program are 80% less likely to leave in their first year. Warby Parker sends electronic welcome packages to employees. And what I love even more is if, on the first day of a remote worker, there is a little package at 9 a.m. in front of their door with some graspable things, some swag, some materials. And especially in these days, you can't underestimate how much more important and how much more attached people are to physical things again. So what can we do? Needless to say, we need to cover the basics, and that means, it sounds obvious, but we need to have a lot of thought into what do people really need to be successful at home? How do they get the links, the logins, the passwords? Do they have all the equipment at home that they need? And can we think about a nice gesture like sending them a really good chair or a really good lamp, or maybe just a plant, something just to show appreciation of them as a new employee? And when it comes to communication, we simply need to communicate clearly, and often we need to do it much more often than we would in person. So set expectations, determine clear goals and actions for the first week, the first 4 weeks, the first 90 days. And you need to remember that what you can see here on this slide, this look over the shoulder, that's simply not there in remote onboarding anymore. So you won't notice that easily if somebody's bored, if somebody's struggling. You won't hear if somebody's telling something wrong to a customer or a colleague. So think about some ways. What I like is the idea of an open line of communication for a day or two, where both, where you maybe and the new employee both leave their cameras on for, a few hours. It's an attempt to digitalize the look over the shoulder. And when it comes to team bonds, meaningful social interactions is the most decisive factor when it comes to retention. And in the virtual world, this requires a much more intentional approach, because a lot of those situations, meeting somebody at the coffee machine, going for lunch, an informal chat in the hallways, all of this is missing. So obviously, first thing, your new employee should meet their colleagues. One advice I have here is don't have the new employee set up all these calls, but ask your team to do it. There is a certain barrier, especially in the beginning, to be knowing when can I book someone in the calendar? When is it a good time? Can I really do this? So take that stress, that barrier away from them. And the best case is put a buddy next to them in an onboarding buddy program that will certainly help them ease some of this onboarding stress. And two things I would always recommend to do is, number one, ask them to schedule informal talks with the new employee. That's not about a topic, that is maybe, just around what I'm doing in private, or, just doing some small talk. And potentially set up a joint team event with everyone and send something nice out. Some companies send out wine tasting or gin tasting. Some companies cannot do that for compliance reasons. So you can send out, I don't know, coffee tasting or tea tasting, or a magic set. There's a lot of good ideas, but do something that everyone who joins these meetings has the feelings they can benefit from these meetings, and it's fun to help onboarding new employees. And with that, I'd like to conclude and kind of summarize the 3 aspects that I have touched upon today on how can we create a better candidate experience. So it starts by leveraging automation where it counts to make it faster for candidates to start interacting with us in a meaningful way. It's more engaging and it helps us to be more efficient on our end. Set candidates up for virtual success with flexibility, practice empathy, and lastly, be purposeful with the communication and team building when onboarding remote or hybrid employees. And with that, thank you from my end. We always love it when companies are interested in making a better experience for candidates and hiring talent from across the world. And with that, I'm going to not do it across the world, but I'm going to cut it back from Düsseldorf to Berlin. Thank you.